The harmony of spheres cut through the void of space like a silver needle, its hull gleaming with the polished perfection that marked all Confederation vessels. Ambassador Velthar stood at the observation deck, her forearms crossed in what her species considered a gesture of patient authority. Through the transparent aluminum viewport, Earth grew larger with each passing moment, a swirling blue and white marble that looked utterly unremarkable. "Another primitive world," she muttered to her aide, a spider-like creature named Crix, who scurried along the ceiling. "The intelligence reports suggest they've barely mastered chemical propulsion. I expect we'll be done with the integration ceremony before the next meal cycle." Crix clicked his mandibles in agreement. "The scanner readings show only basic electromagnetic signatures, Ambassador. Their most advanced technology appears to be some sort of crude satellite network." Velthar adjusted her ceremonial robes, flowing garments embedded with microcrystals, that shifted color according to her mood. Currently, they displayed the calm blue of diplomatic patience, though hints of purple boredom flickered at the edges. As the Confederation's lead integration specialist, she had performed this same ritual on over 300 worlds. Primitive species, grateful for the honor of joining galactic civilization, always followed the same predictable pattern. Meanwhile, on Earth's primary orbital defense station, Admiral Park June floated in the zero-gravity command center, his magnetic boots keeping him anchored to the metal floor. The station itself was a marvel of human engineering, a rotating wheel of gleaming steel and carbon fiber that housed Earth's first line of diplomatic defense. Through the panoramic windows, he could see the alien vessel approaching with what appeared to be standard diplomatic protocols. "Admiral, we're picking up their transmission now," announced Communications Officer Nara, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that materialized in the air before her. The technology looked almost organic, as if the light itself had been trained to respond to human touch. June studied the approaching vessel through his tactical display. Unlike the aliens, he didn't see a primitive encounter ahead. His deep brown eyes held the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what was about to unfold. Pattern recognition suggests they're expecting a standard first contact scenario, Lieutenant Kim. Lieutenant So-Young Kim worked at the communications array, a complex system that seemed to bend space around itself as it operated. Her console displayed not just the alien ship's position, but somehow showed probability streams of where it might be in the next few seconds. "Should I initialize the temporal buffer zone, sir?" "Standard protocol," June replied calmly. "We don't want them wandering into active time streams during their first visit. That would be diplomatically awkward." Kim's fingers moved across controls that hummed with an energy that made the air itself seem to shimmer. "Broadcasting now, Admiral." The message that reached the harmony of spheres was transmitted through technologies the Confederation had never encountered. Instead of simple radio waves, the communication arrived through folded space-time, carrying not just words but emotional context and temporal positioning data. "Welcome to Earth," came the warm, professional voice of Lieutenant Kim. "Please maintain current velocity and avoid any sudden directional changes. We're currently experiencing our afternoon rush period, and we'd hate for you to accidentally intersect with someone's commute timeline." On the alien vessel, Ambassador Velthar's translator struggled with the message. The device, considered the pinnacle of Confederation technology, began making sounds it had never made before, soft chiming notes that seemed confused. "Rush period?" Velthar repeated, her ceremonial robes shifting to a pale yellow of puzzlement. "Crix, what could possibly constitute a rush on a world that hasn't even achieved faster-than-light travel?" The spider creature consulted his instruments, his 8 eyes blinking in sequence as he tried to make sense of the readings. "Ambassador, I'm detecting some unusual energy signatures from the planet's surface. The patterns are inconsistent." "Inconsistent how?" "Well," Crix clicked nervously, "according to my scans, several of their major population centers appear to exist in multiple temporal states simultaneously, but that's clearly impossible, so there must be some interference with our equipment." Back, on the orbital station, June watched the alien vessel's hesitation with mild amusement. Through his command interface, He could see real-time updates from Earth's surface, millions of humans going about their daily routines, most of them operating on slightly accelerated personal time streams to fit more productivity into their schedules. "They seem confused by our welcome message," observed Nara, monitoring the alien ship's communication frequencies. "First-time visitors usually are," June replied. "Remember when the Arcturus delegation showed up during Black Friday shopping season? They thought we were under attack by our own retail sector." Lieutenant Kim suppressed a smile. "Should I clarify the temporal zone restrictions, sir? Let's see how they handle the approach first. If they start scanning too aggressively, we might need to activate the courtesy shields." The Harmony of Spheres continued its descent, its crew completely unaware that they were about to become part of the most memorable diplomatic incident in Confederation history. Captain Lee Hyun stepped out of the diplomatic transport pod, his boots clicking against the crystalline landing platform that stretched across Seoul's skyline like a bridge made of frozen starlight. The structure itself defied conventional physics, appearing solid to the touch, yet translucent enough to reveal the bustling city 40 stories below. Behind him, the alien delegation emerged with varying degrees of uncertainty. Ambassador Velthar was the first to exit, her forearms spread wide as she took in the panoramic view of Seoul's diplomatic district. The city stretched endlessly in all directions, a maze of gleaming towers that seemed to twist and spiral into the clouds themselves. What caught her attention immediately wasn't the impressive architecture, but the way the buildings seemed to pulse with an inner light that shifted between warm gold and cool silver. "Impressive construction," she admitted, though her ceremonial robes flickered with cautious orange hues. "Your species has achieved remarkable architectural advancement for such a young civilization," Captain Lee smiled, adjusting his dress uniform that bore the subtle emblem of Earth's diplomatic corps. A simple globe surrounded by what looked like clock hands, moving in impossible directions. "Thank you, Ambassador. The district was built using our standard compression techniques. We managed to fit about 3 times the normal space into the available area." Crix, the spider-like engineer, scuttled nervously along the platform's edge, his scanning equipment making soft beeping sounds that grew increasingly frantic. "Captain," he chittered to Velthar, "my readings are showing spatial anomalies throughout this entire structure. The internal volume appears to be larger than the external dimensions." "Oh, that's just the folding," Lee explained cheerfully, as if discussing the weather. "We learned to bend space during our urban planning phase. Seoul was getting pretty crowded, so the city planners figured out how to add extra dimensions to the available real estate. Pretty standard stuff these days." The delegation followed Lee along a walkway that seemed to extend itself as they moved, creating new sections of pathway just ahead of their steps, while quietly recycling the portions they'd already crossed. Velthar's scanner, a device the size of her palm that could analyze matter down to the quantum level, began displaying readings that made no sense according to known physics. "Captain Lee," she said carefully, "my instruments suggest that your city is experiencing significant temporal fluctuations. Buildings appear to be existing in multiple time states simultaneously." Lee paused at an observation point, where the walkway widened into a circular platform. Below them, Seoul's streets bustled with activity that looked almost normal at first glance. Hovercars glided silently between buildings, pedestrians moved along sidewalks, and the general rhythm of urban life continued its familiar beat. But something was off. "Yeah, you're probably picking up the lunch crowd," Lee said, checking. A device on his wrist that looked like a watch, but displayed time in formats that hurt to look at directly. The numbers seemed to move in several directions at once, occasionally showing negative values or fractions that included imaginary numbers. As if on cue, the city below began to change. What had been normal urban movement suddenly accelerated into a blur of motion. People on the streets moved like video played at triple speed. Hovercars zipped between buildings so fast they left light trails, and entire crowds of pedestrians flickered in and out of visibility as they compressed their lunch breaks into microseconds of real time. Engineer Yoon Tae-ho, a mantis-like creature with compound eyes and delicate sensing antennae, nearly dropped his equipment as his readings spiked off every known scale. "Ambassador," he whispered urgently, his translator struggling to keep up. With his rapid speech patterns, my instruments are detecting massive temporal distortions across the entire planet. The chronometer readings are completely unstable. The energy signatures he was detecting painted a picture that challenged everything the Confederation knew about space-time manipulation. Millions of individual temporal fields were operating, simultaneously, each one slightly out of phase with normal time flow. The sheer scale of what he was observing suggested that humanity had somehow mastered technologies that the Confederation's most advanced species still considered theoretical. Temporal. What now? Captain Lee asked politely, turning from his observation of the accelerated city below. His expression held the kind of casual confusion of someone who had just heard a familiar concept, described in unnecessarily complicated terms. Velthar's robes shifted to deep purple, the color her species displayed when confronting information that didn't fit their understanding of reality. Temporal distortions, Captain. Time manipulation on a massive scale. According to our readings, millions of your citizens are operating in accelerated time streams. Oh, you mean the time thing? Lee nodded with understanding. Yeah, most humans figured that out during college finals week. You know how it is. Too much stuff to do, not enough hours in the day. Someone discovered that the right combination of stress hormones and caffeine consumption creates these little pockets where time gets kind of stretchy. He gestured toward the city where the lunch rush was beginning to wind down, normal speed gradually returning to the streets below. Started as a survival mechanism for students cramming for exams, turns out when you're really focused and properly caffeinated, you can squeeze about 6 hours of productivity into 30 minutes of regular time. Once word got out, pretty much everyone learned how to do it. Crix's scanning equipment began smoking slightly as it tried to process readings that violated several fundamental laws of physics. But the energy requirements alone should be impossible for biological entities to generate. Energy requirements? Lee looked genuinely puzzled. It doesn't really take extra energy. It's more like efficient time management, though I guess you do get pretty hungry afterward. Dr. Han Minho pressed his palm against a section of what appeared to be solid wall, and the surface rippled like water before dissolving into an archway. The observation deck beyond stretched out like the prow of an invisible ship, offering an unobstructed view of downtown Seoul spread out 300 meters below. The platform itself seemed to be made of crystallized air, completely transparent, yet solid enough to support the weight of the entire alien delegation. This is our primary observation point for studying temporal flow patterns, Dr. Han explained, his white lab coat fluttering in a breeze that somehow existed at this impossible height. The coat bore patches that seemed to move on their own, displaying shifting equations and diagrams that rewrote themselves as the wearer's thoughts changed. Ambassador Velthar approached the edge cautiously, her forearms gripping the barrier that materialized just as she reached for it. Below them, Seoul pulsed with a rhythm that hurt to watch directly. The city breathed like a living organism, expanding and contracting as waves of accelerated time swept through different districts. The phenomenon you're about to witness occurs every weekday between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. local time, Dr. Han continued, checking a device that looked like a cross between a pocket watch and a small galaxy. The timepiece displayed not just the current time, but showed probability cascades of what time it might become in the next few moments. As if responding to his words, the city below began its afternoon transformation. What started as normal urban movement suddenly exploded into controlled chaos. Construction sites that had been empty lots moments before erupted with activity as crews materialized and began building at speeds that defied physics. Engineer Yoon, Taeho's compound eyes tracked the construction process with fascination and terror. Concrete mixers poured foundations that hardened in seconds. Steel beams welded themselves into place with precision that suggested the workers were operating with superhuman reflexes, and entire floors of buildings rose like time-lapse photography come to life. To observe the construction crew on the 42nd building from the left, Dr. Han pointed toward a site where a skyscraper was growing like a plant reaching for sunlight. Team leader Park Dong-woo and his crew are compressing their 8-hour shift into approximately 12 minutes of real time. They maintain full safety protocols and quality standards throughout the acceleration process. The aliens watched in stunned silence as the construction workers moved with the fluid grace of dancers, performing an impossibly fast choreography. Safety equipment appeared and disappeared as needed. Tools flowed from hand to hand, without anyone seeming to pass them, and the building itself rose floor by floor with the steady inevitability of sunrise. What we're witnessing, Dr. Han explained with the casual tone of someone describing a perfectly normal Tuesday afternoon, is approximately 2.3 million humans simultaneously compressing their personal time streams. Rush hour isn't about transportation anymore. It's about fitting 30-hour workdays into 8-hour time slots. Crix's scanning equipment began displaying readings that made his species' most advanced mathematics look like finger counting. The energy patterns are impossible, he chittered frantically. Each individual human is generating temporal fields, equivalent to what our most powerful starships produce for hyperspace jumps. Actually, it's more efficient than you might think, Dr. Han replied, pulling out what looked like a simple coffee thermos, but hummed with barely contained energy. The key breakthrough came when we realized that human consciousness naturally creates small distortions in space-time when under pressure. We just learned to amplify and direct those distortions. Below them, the pedestrian level had become a light show of human movement. People flickered between locations like ghosts made of light, their accelerated movement creating trails that painted temporary rainbows across the sidewalks. Business meetings that would normally take hours compressed into minutes of intensive discussion, with participants speaking and listening at velocities that turned conversation into a form of controlled telepathy. Ambassador Velthar watched, in growing horror, as her understanding of the universe crumbled. "This is impossible," she whispered, her ceremonial robes cycling through colors that had no names in any known language. "Your species shouldn't have access to technology this advanced. According to every model we have, temporal manipulation on this scale requires computational power equivalent to small stars." "Technology?" Dr. Han looked genuinely confused, the same expression someone might wear if asked to explain how they managed to walk without falling over. "We don't really use technology for this. It's more like a learned skill. Most people pick it up during their university years, when they're trying to balance multiple courses, part-time jobs, and social lives." He gestured toward the city below, where the afternoon rush was reaching its peak intensity. "The really impressive thing is the coordination. Watch how the traffic management works." The hovercars and transport pods were moving in patterns that looked like three-dimensional music made visible. Vehicles flowed through intersections without stopping, their paths weaving together with precision that suggested some form of hive mind coordination. But there were no traffic controllers, no central command system, just millions of individuals making split-second decisions while operating in accelerated time. Each driver is processing traffic data and making route adjustments faster than our computers can track, Dr. Han explained. They're essentially having conversations with every other vehicle in the city, negotiating optimal paths through compressed time. It's beautiful, really. But the computational requirements alone, engineer Yun Tai-ho protested weakly. "We just learned to multitask really, really well," Dr. Han shrugged. "Want some coffee? It helps with the temporal adjustment. Fair warning, though, our coffee might be a bit strong for non-humans. We've had to boost the caffeine content to keep up with the accelerated metabolisms." Commander Yu Dahai led the alien delegation through the entrance of Seoul's financial district, where the very air seemed to shimmer with barely contained energy. The building they approached looked like a crystal cathedral that had been stretched into impossible geometric shapes, its walls displaying flowing streams of data that moved like rivers of liquid light. The structure itself appeared to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, with sections that folded in on themselves while somehow remaining perfectly functional. "Welcome to the Seoul Financial Exchange," Commander Yu announced, her uniform bearing insignia that shifted between different ranks depending on which temporal layer was currently active. "Fair warning, things get a bit intense in here during trading hours." The moment they passed through the entrance, Ambassador Velthar's senses were assaulted by something that shouldn't have been possible. The trading floor stretched out before them like a vast amphitheater, but instead of a single level of activity, She could perceive 17 distinct layers of time operating simultaneously. Traders worked at desks that existed in rapid-fire bursts of accelerated time, while holographic displays showed market data streaming at speeds that made light seem sluggish. "My instruments are detecting temporal cascade failures throughout this entire structure," Engineer Yoon Tai-ho whispered urgently, his scanning equipment now producing sounds that resembled electronic screaming. "The chronometer readings are showing impossible overlaps, events that are happening before their causes, effects that precede their origins." Commander Yu checked her wrist device, which displayed time in formats that seemed to include mathematical concepts that hadn't been invented yet. "Yeah, we're running a bit behind schedule in the futures market today. The derivatives traders accidentally bought some stocks that won't be invented until next month, so we're having to do a bit of temporal bookkeeping." On the trading floor below, hundreds of humans worked at a pace that defied comprehension. Trader Lee Kyung-min sat at a workstation that appeared to be constructed from crystallized mathematics, his fingers moving across interfaces that responded to thoughts rather than touch. Around him, holographic displays showed stock prices, commodity futures, and economic indicators from not just the present moment, but from probable futures and alternate timeline scenarios. "The key innovation," Commander Yu explained as they descended toward the main trading floor, was realizing that financial markets are essentially time manipulation exercises anyway. Stock prices are just predictions about future value, so we figured out how to actually peek ahead and see how those predictions turn out. Ambassador Velthar watched in growing panic as trader Kim Bo-ram completed what appeared to be a complex negotiation with someone who existed 15 minutes in the future. The conversation played out in accelerated bursts, with both participants speaking at velocities that compressed entire presentations into single syllables of hyper-dense communication. "She's negotiating the purchase of rare earth minerals from an asteroid mining operation that hasn't launched yet," Commander Yu noted casually. "The mining crew will start their journey next Thursday, but by operating in accelerated time, she can secure the contract before their competitors even know. The opportunity exists." Crick scuttled along the ceiling, his multiple eyes trying to track the impossible flow of activity below. "How do you prevent paradoxes? If you're trading based on future information, shouldn't that change the very futures you're observing?" "That's why we use the group chat system," Commander Yu replied, pulling out a device that looked like a smartphone crossed with a small portal to another dimension. The screen displayed messages that appeared to be written in languages that included temporal tenses for events that might happen conditionally in alternate realities. "Group chat?" Velthar's voice cracked with desperation. "Yeah, everyone stays connected across all the different time layers. When someone makes a trade that might cause a paradox, the chat alerts everyone else so they can adjust their actions accordingly. It's like collaborative timeline maintenance." On the trading floor, analyst Park Jin-woo was processing economic data at a rate that made quantum computers look like pocket calculators. His workstation displayed market analysis that incorporated not just current trends, but probability matrices. For economic scenarios that spanned multiple decades, charts showed the butterfly effect of individual trades rippling through alternate histories, with color-coded warnings for actions that might accidentally crash the economies of neighboring star systems. "We do have to be careful about causality. Loops, though," Commander Yu admitted, her expression becoming slightly sheepish. "Last Tuesday, we accidentally created 6 different timeline branches during the quarterly budget meeting. Took the cleanup crew 3 days to merge them back together, and we're still getting duplicate emails from the versions of ourselves that got temporarily displaced." Trader Choi Woo-jin looked up from his desk where he appeared to be conducting 12 separate conversations across multiple time streams. His workstation was surrounded by floating displays that showed him communicating with colleagues who existed at different points in time, some several minutes in the past, others speaking from tomorrow afternoon. "Hey, Commander," he called out cheerfully, his voice somehow reaching them despite the fact that he was clearly operating in a different temporal framework. "Tell the aliens we said hi from next week. Oh, and let them know that the Galactic Confederation stock futures are looking pretty volatile right now." might want to diversify their portfolio before the news breaks about humanity joining the market. Ambassador Velthar's temporal sensors finally gave up entirely, producing a small puff of smoke before going completely silent. "This is beyond." "Impossible," she whispered. "You're treating causality like a suggestion rather than a fundamental law of physics." "Laws are more like guidelines anyway," Commander Yu shrugged. "Besides, once you learn to work with time instead of against it, everything becomes much more efficient." "Want to see the currency exchange? We've got people trading in monetary systems from civilizations that won't exist for another 1,000 years. The conference room aboard Earth's orbital station existed in a state of controlled temporal chaos that made Ambassador Velthar's remaining functional sensors weep electronic tears. The chamber itself seemed to breathe with time, its walls expanding and contracting as different moments overlapped and separated, like layers of cosmic pastry. Through the massive viewport, the harmony of spheres hung in space like a silver teardrop, its engines already beginning the pre-flight warm-up sequence that would carry the traumatized alien delegation far from Earth's impossible reality. Admiral. Park Jun sat across from Ambassador Velthar at a conference table that appeared to be carved from a single piece of crystallized space-time. The surface reflected not just their current images, but showed ghostly overlays of past and future versions of this same meeting playing out with subtle variations. In one reflection, Velthar was crying. In another, she was laughing hysterically. In a third, she appeared to be taking frantic notes while Admiral Park explained something with animated gestures. "Ambassador," Admiral Park began, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone who had conducted this exact conversation several times across multiple timelines. "I want to thank you for taking the time to visit our little planet, the Galactics. Confederation's invitation is truly an honor." Velthar leaned forward desperately, her ceremonial robes now cycling through colors that didn't exist in normal space. "Surely your species would benefit from joining the Galactic Confederation," she pleaded, her forearms gesturing frantically. "We offer advanced technology that could revolutionize your civilization, faster-than-light travel, energy manipulation, systems, medical advances that could extend your lifespans by centuries." "That's very generous," Admiral Park replied with genuine politeness. "But we're actually doing pretty well in those areas. Our medical team figured out how to extend lifespans by just slowing down personal time during sleep. Turns out if you spend 8 hours sleeping in compressed time, you only age about 20 minutes while getting a full night's rest." Engineer Yoon Tai-ho, who had spent the entire diplomatic visit in various states of electronic breakdown, made one final attempt to understand what he was witnessing. "But the energy requirements for your temporal manipulations should be astronomical. Our calculations suggest you'd need to harness the power output of entire stars." "Oh, we tried that approach first," Admiral Park nodded. "But it turned out to be way more complicated than necessary. Dr. Kim Hae-won in our Applied Procrastination Department discovered that human guilt over wasted time is actually a form of temporal energy. Now we just run our time acceleration systems off the collective stress of people running late for meetings. Through the viewport, something impossible was beginning to happen. Dozens of identical copies of Earth's orbital station were materializing around them, each one slightly out of phase with the others. Some appeared more advanced, with additional modules and enhanced technology. Others looked like earlier versions, simpler but somehow more elegant in their design. "Ah," Admiral Park checked his multidimensional chronometer. "Looks like it's time for our weekly interdimensional coordination meeting. We have to sync up with all the parallel versions of Earth's government to make sure we're not accidentally contradicting each other's policies." Secretary Kang Ji-woo materialized directly from what appeared to be a fold in reality itself, stepping out of empty air as casually as someone emerging from an elevator. Her business suit was perfectly pressed despite having just traveled through the fabric of space-time, and she carried a briefcase that seemed to contain documents from several different centuries. "Sorry I'm late," she announced, though her arrival was precisely on time according to Admiral Park's chronometer. "Had to stop by the Department of Temporal Resources to file the paperwork for next month's timeline merger. The version of myself From the timeline where we invented coffee 200 years earlier, wanted to make sure we maintain beverage consistency across all realities. Ambassador Velthar's mind finally began to crack under the strain of trying to process information that violated every law of physics she understood. How do you coordinate anything? How do you make decisions when multiple versions of your government exist simultaneously? Group voting mostly, Secretary Kang replied cheerfully. Though we did have to establish some ground rules after the incident where the timeline where pizza was never invented tried to outlaw Italian food across all realities. That caused some diplomatic tensions with the pasta-positive timelines. Admiral Park leaned back in his chair, which adjusted itself automatically to accommodate his temporal displacement. We appreciate the Confederation's offer, Ambassador, but we're still working through some scheduling conflicts. The versions of ourselves from next Thursday haven't approved the paperwork yet, and the Friday timeline is completely booked until next month. Besides, Secretary Kang added, pulling out a device that looked like a smartphone but displayed calendar appointments that included events scheduled for yesterday's tomorrow and next week's last month. We just figured out how to compress our commute times to negative seconds. Most of our staff are actually arriving at work before they leave home now. Makes morning traffic much more manageable, though it does create some interesting parking situations. Through the viewport, the dozens of parallel Earth stations began a complex dance of temporal coordination. Government officials from different timelines emerged from various forms of dimensional transport. Some walked out of mirrors, others stepped through doorways that opened onto different decades, and a few simply faded into existence like photographs, developing in reverse. Ambassador Velthar watched in mounting horror as her universe's understanding of causality, physics, and basic logic crumbled around her. "This is impossible," she whispered. "Entire civilizations across the galaxy spend millennia trying to achieve even basic temporal manipulation, and you've turned it into a daily convenience." "Well," Admiral Park said modestly, "we are pretty good at being efficient with our time. It's a cultural thing." The harmony of spheres began moving away from the orbital station as its captain, who had been monitoring the situation from a safe distance, decided that retreat was the better part of valor. Ambassador Velthar fled toward the docking bay, her scanning equipment trailing smoke and sparks, as Earth's temporal signatures became too chaotic for any known instrument to process. As the Confederation vessel jumped to hyperspace with the desperate urgency of someone fleeing a natural disaster, Ambassador Velthar made one final entry in her mission report. Species classification: impossible. Recommend avoiding system entirely. They've somehow turned being late into a superpower. Additional note: suggest updating Confederation physics. Textbooks. Current laws of reality appear to be more like polite suggestions when applied to humans. The harmony of spheres vanished into the safety of faster-than-light travel, carrying with it the tale of the species that had accidentally broken the universe by trying to make their daily schedules more convenient. The end.